This is the Russian Revolution. Now, the Russian Revolution itself, I'm pretty sure I talked about it earlier in the channel. And today I'm just going to go ahead and make a remake of that. Otherwise, this is just going to be repetitive. Mainly though, I'm talking about the Russian Revolution today, mainly because I'm reading Leo Tolstoy's Anna Karenina. And I know Anna Karenina, the events are set in like the 1870s, and that's like way before the Russian Revolution was even a thing. But this was the time when like everything was starting to become modern, and there were the younger generation that um, wanted to be more liberal, and they wanted to be more free and wanted to be able to choose whatever they wanted to do, like who they wanted to marry, and as long as it was within the law, what they wanted to do, whatever that would be. And the thing is, this is the context, and this is the start of something big. And a Karenina might be set sometime before this Russian Revolution, yes, but I feel like it's still worth knowing the Russian Revolution to be able to understand what the impact of Anna Karenina was and what the context of this place was. Little note, this was published before the Russian Revolution was even happening, but it does talk about the context of the Russian Revolution, so it will factor into this. Let's get to start with. First off, we have to talk about the rest of the world. Here is a map of Europe. This is a traditionalist monarchical map. You can see all the way from France, Britain, Ireland, back before they took Northern Ireland, Spain, and Portugal. Then we have like the colonies down there. We have big Mother Russia. We have Germany. And yeah, everything else is like that. So this map itself is a little bit inaccurate in the sense of this. But this was essentially what imperialist Europe was like. But then they started to change. Everyone started modernizing. Here is a picture from Victorian England, where they go ahead and created seems like steamboats, better factories, and even good working conditions. The French made the slogan liberty, equality, fraternity. That's a really good slogan, and which became part of the revolution and turned them into a more modern society, and eventually made Paris, which is considered the most romantic city in the entire world, at least today, that it is the most romantic city in the entire world. Speaking of which, whereas the rest of the Europe was starting to go up, like Germany was creating beer and cars, England had its steamboats, Victorians, and the railway. Choo choo, choo choo. And the French had their liberty, equality, and fraternity. Russians were like, yeah, also the Italians had pizza. The Russians were like somewhat stuck in the past, whereas other countries pretty much eliminated their peasants. The Russians, still had their serfs. Technically, those were peasants, and there were different levels of peasants as well too. The regular peasants who just like couldn't afford anything, serfs who were just like owned by someone else. It's like a slave, but more or less like they had more rights than slaves, and they were treated much better than slaves. So they didn't have much better food than slaves, pretty much because there was a really big famine. Russia has the most population in the entire world at the time. Now it's India. It used to be China, and used to be Russia, but now it's India. And yeah, this famine went ahead and destroyed this entire place, and all the serfs were pretty bad and not well off. So the ones who had wealthy masters were still able to eat something. The ones who weren't exactly having the most wealthy masters were all like, yeah, this might not be the best situation ever. And there was even reports that they went ahead and resorted to cannibalism. So you can't exactly confirm it, but I would understand why they would go cannibalistic. This painting might make them look really good and well off, but as you can see from their faces, they're all like, how am I going to survive this next day? They lived in rural communities, and one good thing did happen to them, though. Serfdom was abolished by this guy. His name is Tsar Alexander II. This guy will be relevant to the story later. Very relevant to the story later. And he went ahead and created the reforms. The Reform Act, where this Reform Act essentially said that all serfs shall be freed, and that there's no such thing as serfs anymore. So there was this little cat. So they went ahead and he talked to his landowners, and they weren't happy about losing their free labor, and so they had to pay them back like 834,000. Like something that none of them could actually afford, and well, essentially just kept them in serfdom. They would earn this money and it would take them like decades to be able to pay that back. It's been decades, and well, you can see that these wealthy landowners do not exist anymore. You will see why in a little bit. So this guy was seen as one of the great reformers. He wasn't that popular among the aristocracy, and he wasn't even that much popular than the peasants and the serfs. So he was a start. Then his son Alexander III had to mess everything up and pretty much eliminated all the reforms he did, except freeing serfdom. He kept that. His son eventually went ahead and got another son, eventually becoming his grandson, Alexander II. Alexander III went ahead and gave birth to Tsar Nicholas II, who had, as I will have to mention right now, absolutely zero training in how to become a Tsar. His father literally just refused to teach him, and and he went to Japan, got a pretty good sweet tattoo, got his head cut off, and well, a little bit, and then he came back and it's like, all right, I'm a man now. Okay, and then his dad was supposed to teach him. Was like, oh no, I'm dead. So yeah, oh no. Tsar Nicholas II literally himself went ahead and said, I am not ready to become a czar. He said that during his coronation ceremony, which is a really awkward time to actually say that. So he knows that he isn't exactly the best czar. In fact, he wasn't even trained for it. He does still think that he was chosen by divine right, that he would be the one to go ahead and lead Russia. And he did try his best. I will have to admit, he did try his best. Though it was not enough. He did try to go through some reforms, and because of his lack of experience in czarhood, he was all like, okay, I'm just gonna let my subordinates take all this, and he just approved everything that they said, which isn't exactly the best idea in a czar's nation, which meant the serfs got hungrier and everything, and when something known as World War One came into play, well, then you know that something had to be done. He was all like, yeah, I need a general. And then his top advisor was like, yeah, what about this guy? And then he said, no, I'm gonna be the general. You can't lead the war. Who's gonna take care of my country? Who's gonna take care of the country while you're at war? Duh. Rasputin, this crazy hobo man that he made friends with because he saved his son's life, and my wife, who's German, and they were fighting the Germans. How is this gonna look? One word, or technically two words, not good. His public opinion once again went down because, well, you know, he's leading the war against Germany while he's leaving his German wife and hobo in charge while he's fighting the Germans. This obviously isn't going to look good, and his reputation started tarnishing. And it wasn't until the Germans went ahead. It wouldn't be soon until the Germans would send some guy named Lenin into the play. He was exiled from, well, Russia for his communist papers and talking about revolution and czars going down. And the Germans were like, hell yeah, this guy's the best man for our job. And they sent him back to Mother Russia. I think it was St. Petersburg, where he went ahead and made a lot of havoc. Firstly, after he did the revolutions, he created the Bolshevik Party. Well, before I even talk about the Bolshevik Party, I have to talk about Bloody Sunday. Bloody Sunday. This is a time when there was this friar who, well, I suppose he was a monk, went ahead and got a peaceful petition. He wanted to send this towards the Tsar. I mean, the guards were all like, yeah, that's not happening. We want to go ahead and send this Tsar, this to our great savior and great Lord and Savior, our Tsar Nicholas II. And then the army was like, yeah, let us please shoot you. Nobody tried to attack the army. The army just shot them out of will. The monk died, and then this was known as Bloody Sunday, which is one of the most regrettable times of history. Then the February Revolution happened, which what did it exactly fail? I will have to say, but it did not exactly succeed as well too. Lenin came into the picture, and then he went ahead and created the October Revolution, and eventually afterwards he went ahead and stormed the Winter Palace. The guards literally just allegedly just gave up. They didn't even give a good fight. They just gave up their arms and everything, and some of them even switched sides. Afterwards, he went ahead and created the Bolshevik Party. The Bolshevik Party. Now, the Bolshevik Party was, ironically, in the minority, even though the word Bolshevik means majority. And then the Mensheviks party was the one in the majority. So most of the time, the Mensheviks were in the majority and the Bolsheviks were in the minority. Let me translate that into common English for you. The minority was in the majority and the majority was in the minority. Now, this chart about the Bolsheviks is... I didn't exactly expect to find this, but it's really good at going ahead and explaining the entire Bolshevik party, which is also the Communist Party. We have a Rykova even telling us how they died. He was shot. We have Bokram, Severloid, Stalin, cerebral hemorrhage would come later. And then we have all the big names too. But the biggest name of all was Stalin, because he was the one who created this entire thing, so he died of stroke. His pal Leon Trotsky would go ahead and create the Red Army, which did a surprisingly good job in winning wars and winning the Civil War, even though the Russians, the Reds, were fighting the Whites and they were outnumbered badly. But the Red Army was trained well, while the White Army was like, yeah, they really sucked. So yeah, that kind of worked. We had several other names that are not important, relevant to the study, but all you have to know right now are these three names. Stalin, Trotsky, this is Lenin, then we have Trotsky, and we have Stalin. Now, he was known as General Secretary. He got the General Secretary, and then he didn't exactly like this position, but then he found out it was a really powerful position as well, too. He could give jobs to people that could give jobs to his friends who would indeed do stuff for him, and then he would go ahead and give jobs to those friends who would do stuff for him. It's like a little pay and go. He could go ahead and get stuff done for them as long as he was secretary. And then Lenin started kind of hating Stalin too, and then he literally told someone saying, "All right, tell the secretary that if I die, Stalin cannot lead the revolution." By the way, who did I make the secretary? You made Stalin the secretary, sir. And then he died of stroke. Bruh. In the end, Stalin would go ahead and rise up into the ranks of the leadership, and he would become the next Soviet leader. He even ruled with an even arguably bigger iron fist than Lenin ever did, if that even is possible. Now, he even had a terrible way of getting Lenin into his coffin. He was mummified and put on display until they actually gave him an actual grave years after Stalin himself died. Stalin himself probably died of cerebral hemorrhage, probably because he imprisoned all his best doctors, and the ones who did exist were bad and didn't really want to tell him that he was sick, because if he was sick, he can lead the revolution, and then the revolution, he can lead the government, and then if the government was leaderless, then, well, you can see the problem there, can't you? Then afterward, we had several even bigger knuckleheaded iron fist leaders until we got Mikhail Gorbachev, who is arguably the best and most reforming leader ever, though he was the most regrettable one in Soviet Union history. I say regrettable in Soviet Union history because the Soviet Union was destroyed because of Mikhail Gorbachev's actions, so Mother Russia was reborn because of Gorbachev's actions. And then, after Lenin died and Stalin came in power, World War II happened. But that's irrelevant to the story. Something I do want to mention is that you probably noticed that I had a lack of dates in this video. I'm not a date person. In fact, when I study world history, nothing much about dates comes up. All I can tell you about is that the October Revolution happened in 1905, and there's not much else you can talk about it. This all happened in the late 19th century, during the events of Anna Karenina, or even War and Peace, which War and Peace is technically about the Napoleonic War, so it's even bigger context than what I told you about earlier. You can watch my Napoleonic Wars videos on that, so I will eventually have to remake that too. So what happened in the end? Bloody revolutions always work, unless they don't. If the army comes and the revolution becomes double bloody, well, that's when you kind of suck. But here's the thing about the Russian Revolution. Do whatever the hell you want, and you will win. Do whatever the heck you want, you will win. That made no sense, did it? Even I don't exactly understand why the Russian Revolution happened. Sure, it's probably because of the Tsarist and the old, still feudalist Russia, whereas the rest of Europe, Western Europe specifically, was still modernizing and everything, and they were going back, going faster than what Russia was capable of. Russia was still stuck in the past. They didn't even have good guns. All they had was numbers. We have the largest army in the world. Yeah, you have the largest army in the world. What does Japan have? How did you get defeated by Japan? Probably because they have like an entirely big Gundam mecha. Except Gundam didn't even exist then, so how could they have it? Because the Japanese military was also modernizing, so they stopped modernizing for a little bit in the in the late 20th century because well the Americans took over. They started modernizing in industrialization, and well they're a little bit behind nowadays, but they were once a leading name in the entire world. Look at Nintendo and look at Nokia. They used to be really big names until well Nintendo's still a big name, come to think of it, but Nokia isn't that big of a nickname too. It's very iconic, sure, but it's not that big anymore. iPhone's more iconic nowadays. But whatever the case, the Russian Revolution itself was arguably a success, and is probably one of the few reasons why Russia is where it is today. I'm not talking about the war, I'm talking about their modernization, like their economy, how good their economy is, that kind of stuff. So in the end, I hope you guys enjoyed this remake of my Russian Revolution. Probably not as fun as my old video, but is a little bit more accurate, I will say. And until next time, Shihana, peace, bye bye. For dates of the Russian Revolution, please check out the old video.